Hi everyone, this is Matthew Jenner for Card Runners, and I'm here with my third concept series, which is going to show you how to use Flopzilla to help you visualize your range. This is a remix of the second place video from last year. The video I got second place with in the Card Runners video competition would not have been possible without Flopzilla. I could not have done all those combos manually. It would have taken me absolutely forever. I will show you the methodology I used to make the video and how you can use Flopzilla to help your own game. If you haven't seen the video I'm talking about, then that's not a problem. You can totally watch this video. You don't need to see that video to know what I'm talking about here. Flopzilla is only $25 at the time I made this video right here, and other than Hold'em Manager, is probably the best poker investment I've ever made. You should also download Poker Stove and start using that if you haven't already, and that program is free. And you will get the most out of this video if you actually play along with me while you watch it. I know this is something people probably don't want to do. They probably watch a lot of videos when they've already been grinding, or if they don't want to get everything set up, they're just in their bed on their laptop. But if you do want to get the absolute most out of this, you probably want to download Flopzilla and start playing along with me as I make the video right now. So now we need to understand what our goal is. Flopzilla is an extremely useful tool for helping us to make sure we're defending enough and our opponent can't profitably bluff any two cards. We will use the term break even when the EV is very, very close to zero. For example, if you call a middle position open with pocket twos in the small blind and the flop comes Jack of Hearts, Seven of Hearts, Five of Clubs multi-way, when you check, your EV isn't technically zero since it can check around and you will turn a set around 5% of the time. But your EV is close enough to zero that we can effectively say if we can properly bluff 2-2 on the flop, we can bluff any two cards and our opponent is doing something wrong. This is a very, very important concept which I talk about a lot in my videos, which is even if you can't completely prove your opponent shouldn't be able to profitably bluff with any two cards, it's probably a very fair assumption to make. For example, if your opponent was able to donk bet, like let's say it's 4 to the flop, and your opponent flat in the small blind with pocket twos, if your opponent can donk bet on a Jack 7-5 board with pocket twos, then the three other players are probably, really certainly doing something wrong if that donk bet is profitable with pocket twos, because your opponent is bluffing pretty much the worst possible hand in his range, and he's still making money doing that. So if he could make money by donk bluffing with pocket twos there, then since there's so little value in checking, it's so incredibly close to zero, he'd almost certainly donk bet with the twos here, and he'd certainly take that profit rather than check. And since putting money into the pot with the weakest hand in your range multi-way out of positions should almost always be a bad idea, we can pretty safely conclude he's doing something or we're doing something theoretically wrong if he's making money, even if we haven't mathematically proven it, which would pretty much be impossible. There is more than one way to defend in some situations. Only one way will be theoretically optimal, but many ways can prevent our opponents from making money by defending any two cards. For example, if you want to defend against your opponent's floats on the flop, you can either double barrel, or check call, or check raise the turn. You must do some combination that prevents your opponent from calling too lightly on the flop, but we can't solve for what combination is optimal. Nevertheless, one combination will be theoretically optimal even if we can't figure out which, so be able to justify to yourself why you are or are not donking the flop, double barreling, check raising the turn, etc. So the reason why I picked the turn example is it's very easy to see that if you c-bet the flop and check fold too much on the turn, your opponent can make a profit by floating with any two cards on the flop and just betting and winning when you check to win on the turn. So now, when we want to make our opponent unable to float too wide on the flop, and by floating too wide, I don't mean there aren't some, backdoor flush draws and overcards that he shouldn't be calling with. Theoretically, he needs to call with those types of hands on a lot of boards, so you can't just print money by betting any two cards on the flop. But once your opponent starts floating you way too wide on the flop, he needs to be losing money there or you're being exploited. So the way you defend against him is you either need to double barrel a lot on the turn, because when you double barrel, now he lost his flop bet, because he has to fold his weak hand on the turn, or you can check call the turn. That exploits him even harder, since now he lost not only his flop bet but his turn bet too, unless he got very, very lucky in turns and rivers incredibly well, where he ends up with the best hand. And lastly, you can check raise the turn, which once again causes him to lose both his flop bet and his turn bet. So we should be using some combination of either 2 or 3 of those ways to defend, but we can't prove prove exactly which ones are best. There's no way to mathematically do that. We can make a good guess using theory and having played a bunch of hands ourselves, but we can't mathematically prove which one's best. We can just prove we need to use some combination of those to hit a certain frequency. So when you are playing, since we can't prove exactly which one's better, you need to be able to justify to yourself why you are taking the line you're taking. Are you not ever donking on the flop? You need to be able to justify why you're not doing that. Are you not double barreling, or are you double barreling a ton? Justify why. Are you check raising the turn a lot, or are you never check raising it? You need to be able to justify why. Even if you can't mathematically prove the exact optimal solution, be able to justify why you're taking the lines you're taking with the ranges you're using. Let's get started. First, you need to plug your pre-flop, flatting, and opening ranges in from every position into Flopzilla and save them. This will not take too long, and if you're really trying to get your game to the next level, it's best to start off with precise ranges and adjust them as you improve. I would highly advise against a generic flat versus an open in position range. There's little point in memorizing frequencies if you know your frequencies are inaccurate. Does your flatting range include all combinations of ace-jack, king-queen, or ace-king? And if so, from what positions? This matters significantly. So, I don't think you need to do this right now if you're just getting used to Flopzilla, but this would probably be the first assignment I would recommend you do, which is to, really get comfortable with what every range you have looks like from every position. So that way, as you try to get better and try to balance flops and turns, you know at least what your pre-flop range looks like, and that gives you a better idea of how to play post-flop. For this video, we will be using a flatting in the button versus middle position opening range. Quickly make your own range to use as we randomly generate flops so you can compare your ranges to my ranges. To get the absolute most out of this video, I think you should make this range that I just mentioned, the flatting in button versus middle position range, right now. And then you can see how your range works on the random flops I generate, and you can compare it to how my range looks and see which range you like more, or maybe my range works a little better on these flops, maybe your range looks a little bit better on other flops, and you can kind of get used to doing what we're going to do and compare your ranges to mine. You'll get better more quickly when you use Flopzilla by doing stuff incorrectly and then correcting your mistake than if you just see something done correctly the first time, or see something done a little bit more correctly than you could do the first time, rather than having made the mistake yourself. So I'd really recommend making this range. Once again, I know a lot of people aren't going to do it because they're just watching the video, but if you do have Flopzilla, make this range so that way when we do randomly generate the flops, you can try to balance your own range and compare it to mine and see if you like mine more or yours more. And making mistakes is going to be a really good thing to helping you improve. Alright, so know what frequencies you're looking for. When randomly generating flops and turns, we need to know what we're looking for. Here, we want to make sure we're defending enough against bets that our opponent can't make a plus EV bet with any two cards. Since he is out of position, he is guaranteed a chance to bet on this flop, and on 95% of board textures where our ranges are comparable strength, he should not be able to properly bet the very worst hands in his range. In other situations, your opponent should be able to theoretically bet with any two cards in his range. If you bet the flop and the turn out of position in a 3-bet pot but check on the river, your opponent will usually have a half pot size bet left. Why is it okay to allow him to make a profitable bet with any two cards? Well, in this case, when we've 3-bet him pre-flop, we bet the flop and we bet the turn and we check the river to him, he risked a large amount of money to maybe get into that very profitable river bluffing spot. He risked money and was not even guaranteed you would put him in this profitable spot, since it requires you to check the river. So, while it's true in this spot, if our opponent knew he would always check the river to him, he would float any two cards on the turn. But the vast majority of the time when we bet the flop and the turn in a 3-bet pot, both in theory and in practice, we're going to be jamming the river ourselves. So when we do check the river to our opponent, we're not going to fold all the time, but we can fold much more often than we're allowed to prevent our opponent from being able to bet any two cards and make a profit on the river. He can bet any two cards on the river once we check to him, and he will make a profit. This is not a case when we're defending on the flop and our opponent is out of position. So we will be defending very aggressively and not let our opponent make plus EV bets with any two cards. I know I used to have this conceptual misunderstanding several years ago when I first started doing theory. It's one of the first theory misunderstandings I had. I would think if my opponent can ever make a profit by bluffing any two cards, I had to do something that was theoretically wrong. That's not true at all. In general, if your opponent can make money by bluffing with any two cards, and it should happen decently often, then he needs to have risked a lot of money to have maybe gotten in that profitable spot. So in my 3-bet pot example, if my opponent wants to double float me on the flop and turn so we can make a profitable river bet, he needs to risk money on the flop, risk money on the turn, and even then he's not guaranteed to get and make that profitable river bet. So that's okay for once I check the river for me to check fold enough that if he did double float me, he's going to win a ton of money by betting the river. I'm going to fold way too much. But on the flop, if we flat our opponent in position, he didn't really risk very much. He just opened the pot, and even if he opened the worst hand in his opening range, a random flop's about to come, he could flop the nuts, or he could flop the second nuts. He could flop a very, very strong hand. So he risked very, very little, and he's guaranteed on the flop, when we flat him from position, he's guaranteed on the flop to get a chance to make a bluff. So he both didn't risk anything, and he's guaranteed to be able to make the bluff. So we can't have that bluff be making, very much money, and then probably it should be losing money if he's bluffing hands that are the worst hands in his range. So make sure you understand that difference, because it's very, very key to understanding when your opponent should be able to bet with any 2 cards and make money, and when he should not be able to. Relevant flop frequencies. Your opponent's bet must work x equals y divided by 1 plus y, where x equals the fold frequency and y equals the bet size as a fraction of a pot size bet. If y equals 0.5, then x equals 0.33. In other words, a half pot size bet needs folds around 33% of the time. A 75% pot size bet needs folds around 43% of the time. I would highly recommend you work out the algebra to this if you haven't already seen this equation before, because just looking at the equation like this isn't usually very helpful at first. Like, it will eventually become second nature if you've, played around with this stuff enough. But looking at an equation just like this on its own probably isn't very helpful, so write out the algebra for how often a bet needs to work, and you'll see that this equation is derived from it, and hopefully you'll get much more comfortable using it. We have to call extra to prevent our opponent from free rolling. Even though weakest hands have some equity, and hands good enough to be bluffs usually have 15% plus equity against our calling range. Let's defend the flop 60% of the time. So, if our opponent needs folds 43% of the time, then that alone means we need to defend 57%, because that way we're only folding 43% of the time. But if we're calling instead of raising, he gets to see a turn card, so we need to add. We need to add to that. We need to defend more than 57% of the time. So we can't solve for what that number should be, so I just added a few percent, and I said, let's make it 60%, so we're adding a bit, and 60% is a pretty easy number to work with. When we raise, our flop raises must be balanced with the right ratio of bluffs to value raises. The math for this is long, but we want to raise the flop with the right ratio of value bets to bluffs so that we can follow through on the turn and river enough so that our opponent cannot call our flop raises with marginal hands too profitably. And when we do bet the river, our range will be balanced and our opponents will be left holding a bluff catcher. Whew, that is a lot to take in. So all I'm saying is, when we're designing our value raise to bluff raise ratio, we're keeping in mind that our end goal is to be able to bet the river at the right frequency with the right ratio of value bets to bluffs to make our opponent indifferent to calling with his medium strength hands on the river. So for example, if we raise the flop and our opponent has top pair to good kicker, on most board textures, if we raise the flop, bet the turn, and bet the river, that top pair good kicker will be pretty much a bluff catcher. If we're betting for value, we always have top pair good kicker beat. And if we're betting as a bluff, that always beats us. So our goal is to be able to bet the river so that the majority of our opponent's hands, he's indifferent to calling with. Because he'll know if we're bluffing, he's going to win. And if we're value betting, he's going to lose. And we're betting at the right frequency with the right ratio that he's completely indifferent to calling. Relevant flop frequencies continued. Your opponent gets amazing odds on the flop, turn, and river once you raise the flop. Imagine your opponent bets 6 big blinds into an 8 big blind pot, and you raise to 18 big blinds. He now risks 12 big blinds by calling to win a 44 big blind pot. Those are some really, really good odds. If you follow through for 25 big blinds on the turn, he risks 25 big blinds to win 69 big blinds, and on the river he risks around 53 big blinds to win a 200 big blind pot. I know I rounded on a few of these. So keep in mind how good of odds you're laying your opponent on each street. He doesn't have to put in a lot more money in the pot to realize some very good immediate odds. The net result of this is you should be bluff raising approximately 1.5 to 2 combos on every flop for every one value made hand combo you raise. The exact number changes based on the board texture and how wide you decide to raise. The more equity your bluffs or value raises have, the more you can bluff. Other factors such as how often you can check back the turn or river and when at showdown are also relevant. This is explained in more detail in my flop raising series, but 1.5 to 2 bluff raises for every value raise is fine for this Flopzilla video. Draws will only allow you around 1 bluff for every 2 value draw combos. So, the actual math for this is a little bit more detailed and intensive than I like to put in my videos, and as I said, I already talked about this in another series I made, but as a general rule of thumb, when I'm trying to fix balanced flops, I would say for every 1 value hand combo I raise, for every 1 value made hand combo I raise, I'm going to throw in around 1.5 or 2 combos of bluffs. The better my value made hand is, the more I'm going to be allowed to bluff. So for example, if I'm raising a set, sets have so much equity that they allow me to bluff a lot of combos. Whereas top pair, top kicker still has a lot of equity, but it allows me to bluff a little bit less combos. Likewise, how much equity my draws have, how much equity my bluffs have, also determine how many bluffs I'm allowed to have for every 1 value made hand I raise. So as I said, I can't show you this exact math for it, and I realize a lot of variables go into this. It will change on board texture, but usually 1.5 to 2 combos of bluffs for every 1 value made hand should be really, really good. Likewise, draws are the opposite, because you're only allowed 1 bluff for every 2 value combos. So, while draws are a really good thing to add into your value raising range, and they do let you bluff a little bit as well, draws have so much less equity since they don't get there all the time, and a lot of times you end up on the river just holding like ace high or 9 high, so because of that, you're allowed to bluff much less, even though they do some very good things for your range, since now if you're raising the flop, you can turn the flush, or you can turn the straight. So keep all this stuff in mind, because we're going to be using this a whole lot when we balance some flops now. So now it's time to randomly generate some flops and show you how useful the tool Flopzilla is for balancing your range and making you a much stronger and better player, especially when you're playing against other regulars. Alright, so I have my Flopzilla open, I have a Microsoft Word document opened, and I have a calculator. These are the 3 things I usually have to have when I'm working on my own game using Flopzilla, and I'm going to show you how I would go about working on my own game when I'm facing a flop c-bet when I called a middle position opened in the button. So, the first thing you got to do is make your range. This is pretty much the range I use against most players when I'm playing 6 max. I'm very, very big on your calling range and position should be pretty wide and pretty strong, although 10.4% is nothing crazy. And then out of position, then I'm going to be much more aggressive 3-betting hands like ace, king off, and queens. If you do want to 3-bet queens and ace, king off, then just be aware that the rest of your range is going to be a lot weaker, so you need to cold call less. It's really up to you. This isn't a pre-flop series, but this is the range I usually recommend as my generic flatting range. Okay, so once you have your range down, we're going to just be using this one. Once you have your range down, have a very good idea of how it looks for when you're actually playing. And then the first thing I usually do is I randomly generate a flop, and if it looks like a reasonable flop to try to solve for starting out, we'll go ahead and do it. All right, so that one looks fine. Jack 8-5 with a flush draw. So I would write on my Word document, flop, Jack of diamonds, 8 of spades, 5 of spades, and I plan on saving this so I can use it later for review when I want to. All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to write total combos on the flop. So then the way you do that, to find out how many combos there are on the flop total for your range, you scroll over this nothing right here, and this nothing will tell you how many combos you have total. So this is telling us we have 122 combos in our range after our range is reduced for the blocker effect. So for this range, we have a total of 122 combos. 122 combos, so I'll write that down. And then just a quick note, you can see this cumulative button. So this means we have nothing or better, and nothing or better will of course be 100% of the time. And then if we click that button, we get the absolute value, and this tells us exactly how often we have 3 of a kind, an overpair, top pair, or nothing. So we actually only have nothing just under 10% of the time, but we have nothing or better, of course, 100% of the time. Okay, so now we have the total combos on the flop, 122. So now I would write desired combos defended. Okay, so how many combos do I desire to defend total? Well, if our opponent's betting around 75% of the pot, we know we need to defend at least 57% if we always raise, as we talked about. So ideally, I want to defend, maybe 60, 62% of the time. So I would say I have 122 combos, and if we want to defend 60% of the time, I would multiply this by 0.6, and that gives us 73. I usually round up, even though it's not technically rounding here, so I would say 74 combos. Okay, so now I know going into this flop, I wanted to defend 74 combos, because I feel if I defend too much more than that, he really would never c-bet bluff because I'm defending too wide. And then if I defend much less than that, he usually would be c-bet bluffing almost anything because I'm folding way too much. So 74 seems about the right balance where he still has an incentive to c-bet bluff with some hands, but not everything. So that looks good to me. So now we're at kind of the first tricky step, which is we know we want to defend around 74 combos, and once again, that's not the exact number. Defending, between 70 and 80 looks totally fine. So we know we want to defend that many combos, but we don't know, do we want to defend mostly by raising? Do we want to defend mostly by flatting? Is it like right around 50-50, somewhere in between? So the first thing I like to do, and you don't have to approach it this way, I just think it's by far the easiest, is I put in my value raise range. So now I would look at this flop right here, and I would try to think to myself, what hands do I want to value raise? So usually I'll have a pretty good idea of what hands are going to be close for whether or not they're strong enough to raise for value. So right now on this hand, hands like pocket queens or ace jack, those two hands seem like they're going to be very, very close for whether or not we can value raise. A hand like sets are clearly going to be strong enough to raise for value, and a hand like king jack clearly isn't going to be. So one thing you can do is you can make a middle position open range, which I've already done. And as you can see, this is a pretty standard range, a 19.2% open. It has every suited ace open. And if you are one of those people that opens king jack off or 8-6 suited, that's fine. Add it in. I just picked what I thought was a pretty general default range. Okay, so now we have the middle position range open. We can now see how strong the middle position open hits this flop. So let's look. The middle position has an overpair beat 11.7% of the time on this flop. So if we scroll to include, if we expand this to include dead cards, let's imagine we had queen of clubs, queen of diamonds, then our opponent would have an overpair beat 10.8% of the time. So we know now when we're raising, queen for value, we're still going to be beat 11% of the time by our opponent's flopping range. And he's not going to be c-betting this flop 100% of the time. In fact, he probably shouldn't be c-betting this flop all that often, so since we can have so many top pairs and, gut shots and stuff, although I will admit the jack high is maybe better for his range than ours since we didn't flat with ace jack off. But nevertheless, our opponent's not going to c-bet 100% of the time, so we're going to be beat once he c-bets significantly more than 11% of the time, because sometimes he's just going to have pocket twos and check fold. Now, I don't have time to go over the math for it in this video, although it's something I'd like to maybe do in future videos. But I would say a good general rule is if your opponent has you beat on the flop over 10% of the time, you probably don't want to be raising for value, especially in cases like this where even if we are ahead of our opponent, if we raise a hand like ace jack, we're really never going to have him, he's never really going to put in a lot of money with a worse hand. A hand like ace jack might get it in against a split, so we can beat some hands if we raise queens because we'll get it in against his ace jack. But for the most part, when we get it in and we have ace jack or queens, if we're ahead, it's probably going to be against our opponent's draw because it's unlikely he's going to put in a 3-bet with ace jack and stack off. So, as I said, we don't have time to go over all the math, but if we're beat over 10% of the time on by our opponent's flopping range, we probably aren't strong enough to raise for value. So now I'm going to remove these dead cards. And now we kind of know, okay, we probably can't raise ace jack or queens for value against most opponents, so I'm going to go back to our range, and now I'm going to start picking and choosing the hands we want to raise for value. So on this flop, one thing I would really quickly pay attention to is, do I need to slow play any sets? And the way I'm going to decide whether or not I want to slow play sets is going to be based on how much trouble I can be in on some bad turns. Are there some turn cards where my opponent can start overbetting against me very, very effectively because the turn card hits his range so much better than mine? And if you look, any ace gives us some 2-pair, any king gives us some 2-pair, any queen gives us some 2-pair trips or sets and straights, any 10 gives us some 2-pair. There's not really a lot of bad turn cards that can really hurt us. Any spade gives us a flush. There's other straights we can have as well on like a 9 gives us 7-6 a straight. So I'm not really too afraid that I need to slow play. It's possible our opponent will start overbetting us on a 2 of hearts turn, but even then, we can have pocket queens, we can have ace jack, and most people aren't really going to overbet that. So I think it's okay if we really polarize our range on this flop, and if we raise all of our good draws for value and all of our really strong made hands like sets for value. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in right here. I'm going to raise pocket 8s, which is 3 combos, pocket 5s, which is 3 combos, and then let's look at the flush draws and see what we want to raise. Okay, so we've got a total of 9 combos of flush draws. Once again, it's in the, I shouldn't say once again, for the first time, it's in the top left corner just above the hand combos. You can see we have flush draw, 7.38%, which is 9 total combos. I should have pointed that out a little bit earlier, but you can see how many combos we have total, and now we want to pick which ones to raise with it. So I think the ace high nut flush draw looks good, maybe not raising the ace jack of spades. And then, so let's say ace queen of spades I want to raise, ace 10 of spades I want to raise. I also want to raise 10 9 of spades looks good, and 7 6 of spades looks good. So the 2 nut flush draws without a pair, and the 2 open-ended straightened flush draws are the flush draws I want to raise. So I'm going to add in 4 flush draws equals, so 10 combos total. All right. Let me just put it, okay. So now that I have a pretty good idea of what my value raising range looks like, I'm going to go ahead and try to guess how many hands I want to bluff raise. So I'm going to say bluff raise range. Okay, so we have 6 combos of sets. So those sets obviously have a ton of equity against pretty much our opponent's entire felting range. So each of those sets I think is going to let me bluff 2 combos of hands. So that's 6 sets, so I'm going to bluff 12 hands, bluff raise 12 combos of hands from that. And then the flush draws, although they have a lot of equity against every hand in our opponent's range, and they balance out our value raising range very, very well, even the nut flush draw really isn't going to improve more than half the time, so we're not going to be able to bluff raise nearly as much. So for the 4 flush draws, I'm going to add 2 combos of bluffs to my range. So 2 combos of bluffs for the 4 flush draws, 12 combos of bluffs for the 6 sets. I'm going to bluff raise 14 combos of hands. So now we want to defend 74 combos, so I have 74 minus 10 combos that I'm raising with for value, minus 14 combos that I'm raising with as a bluff. So now I need to call with 50 hand combos. Calling range equals 50 combos. I find it easier to pick the 50 combos you want to call with and then add in bluff raises with hands that aren't quite strong enough to call. This is a lot easier because then you're picking from the hands that you didn't need to call with to bluff raise, whereas if you throw in all your bluff raises first, you might figure out, oh, maybe that one hand I wanted to bluff raise, let's say in this case it might be something like ace king off with the king of spades, that actually might be strong enough that you need to call. So it's easier to make the calling range first, in my opinion. Okay, so now all we have to do is pick the 50 strongest hands that we weren't raising with. All right, so queen, queen, let's make that 6. We have 6 combos of queens, so that's pretty easy. We have 3 combos of ace jack suited, so that's pretty easy. We can scroll over here to look at all of our top pair type things. Since we knew we were raising our sets and we've already got our overpair, we can take off the cumulative and do absolute. So we have ace jack suited, king jack suited, queen jack suited, and jack 10 suited. So let's go ahead and add that in. I know it's a little time consuming, but I prefer to write out all the combos. It kind of helps you memorize it while you're doing it and make sure you make a mistake less often. All right, so what else do we got? We got pocket 10s and pocket 9s. Sure, those look good. 10, 10, that's 6. 9, 9, that's 6. We got some middle pairs. 9, 8 suited, 8, 7 suited. Sure. 9, 8 suited. 7, 8 suited. I know it's going to scroll out. I'll expand it in just a second. Oh, it did it for us. Remember. Okay, let's see how many straight draws we have. We already raised the nut flush draw. We already raised the open-ended straight draw and flush draw. So now we're just going to have 3 combos left for each straight draw. So that's 10, 9 suited and 7, 6 suited, which will each be 3. 10, 9 suited, 7, 6 suited. Okay. And then how many flush draws did we not raise? We raised 4, so we have 5 left. So flush draw, 5. Now, I did this all really quick as I'm making a video, so I could have missed something. So now the first thing I'm going to do is count how many combos we have right here and see if I missed anything. So I'm going to expand this out. All right. So I'm going to make a bracket for how many we have total. We have 6 plus 3 plus 3, that's 12, plus 3 plus 3, that's 18, plus 6 plus 6, that's 30, 33, 36, 39, 42, 47. So I've got 47, so that means I would prefer to call with 3 more hand combos. So unless I missed one, there's not really any other pairs that look very enticing to me. Like I don't really want to call with anything like pocket 7s. 8x had 3 outs, which I really 5 outs, which is why I called with it, but 8s aren't a very strong pair. So the next best hand, in my opinion, to call with would be something like ace of spades, king x, which is going to make another, which is going to make another 3 combos. So that's going to get us to 50. And then I'm going to put a little bracket for 50. This is how I usually write it. I'm sorry if it seems a little weird right now. So this means the bracket here for 47 means we got 47 combos up to here. Then I added 3 more, and then I have 50 was my desired amount right here, and then 50 for my actual amount. Cool. So now that we have all the hands that we're calling with, now we can go ahead and make the bluff raising range, which is actually looks like it's going to be very, very easy here. Okay, so the first hands I'm going to want to bluff raise are going to be something like what I just originally talked about. Ace of X, King of Spades, so that's going to be 3 more combos. Ace of Spades, Queen X, that's going to be 3 more combos. Ace X, Queen of Spades, that's going to be 3 more combos. Ace, Queen, Diamond, Diamond, that's 1. Ace, Jack, oh sorry, not Ace, Jack, my apologies. Ace 10, Diamond, Diamond, that's going to be another one. These are the backdoor flush draws. And then let's see, that gives us 11 combos right here. So once again, I'm going to just throw in a bracket so I remember it. And then let's see, we need to find 3 more hands we can bluff raise with. Well, Queen, King looks pretty good. So we can go Queen, King of Diamonds, why not? Queen, King, Diamond, Diamond, that gives us 1 more. So now we need 2 more. Nothing really looks that great, to be honest. So this one might be like the one where we kind of have to just stretch it and deal with it. So like, you know, we can use something like pocket 7s with a spade, but better than that looks like 6-5. 6-5 suited will give us actually the 3 more combos we need. So this one worked actually perfectly awesome, since I'm making a video and it makes me look sicker than I am. So we got 14 combos total now. Okay, so this right here is pretty much exactly what we wanted to do. Now, I am not at all saying this is a theoretically optimal range. It almost certainly isn't. We've almost certainly made a mistake either with our flatting range pre-flop, or we made a mistake with some hands on the flop. Nevertheless, we did use a lot of math and theory to get at this range right here, and just from my own personal opinion, this range looks really, really good. If I was playing against an opponent that responded to all my continuation bets using this range, I would be just in so much trouble. Like, I would not be able to win money off the player, and honestly, if he was playing this well, since I can't play this well in practice on all my hands when I'm playing, you know, however many hands an hour, he'd almost certainly be a better player than me and win more money than I do. So you'll definitely find some players when you make ranges like this that are better than you, that disagree with something, or, you know, you might make this range now, and in the future you'll find out, hey, you know what, I think I can slow play a few more sets, or you know what, I think I want to raise a few more flush draws. That's all totally fine. Nevertheless, taking this really highly analytical and mathematical approach will let you design very, very good and very, very effective ranges, and as you improve, it will be very easy to adjust them and make them what you think is a little bit better. So right now, this is the best range I'm capable of making, and I think it's a really good one, but I wouldn't be completely shocked, you know, if there's surely some players out there that can make a better one. And I just noticed right now we had a total of 15 combos here instead of 14, which also brings up an interesting point. When I was doing these ranges, and I've done a whole lot of these when I was trying to get better, don't become obsessive with trying to make all the numbers work out perfectly. So like in this case right here, we have one too many combos that we're bluff raising, and a lot of times we'll be off by even more than that. That's nothing worth getting anal about. Just, okay, we bluff raise one too many combos, and move on to the next flop, get a better idea of how different ranges should look on different flop textures. Don't dwell on a little tiny thing like this. We got really lucky here that the first flop I randomly generated happened to be an incredibly easy one to do. So as we do another flop or two, we'll probably get a tougher one, and in that case, you know what, if we're off by a few combos, we're just going to roll with it. There's no point in adjusting the entire range again and again and again, trying to get things perfect. It's not a productive use of time. Alright, I just added in the template for counting combos to save us some time, since that flop took a while, and now we're going to randomly generate another flop. Boom. Okay, so a very similar flop texture to before, and this flop texture is really going to illustrate why you should be flatting with ace-king off at least some of the time pre-flop, because it really helps to hit king-high boards. Okay, so we're going to just, once again, first of all, figure out how many combos we have on the flop. So the flop is king of spades, 10 of clubs, 7 of spades. King of spades, 10 of clubs, 7 of spades. Total combos on the flop will be 122 combos, so exactly the same as before. That's convenient. Once again, it is taking into account discounts. There just happen to be the same number of combos discounted here as there was in the last flop. All right, and so now we need to figure out how many combos we want to defend. It's going to be the same as before, so 74 combos. And now we need to once again start with a value raising range. So we can look at the middle position opening range, and if you remember before, when we were raising ace-jack, we were going to be beat like 12 or 13% of the time, something around there, and queens were going to be beat something like 10.5 or 11% of the time. So now if we look at the middle position opening range, we see that he only has an overpair or better, even before discounts, of 7.7% of the time. We add in, let's just say we had, ace king off right here. We're only going to have ace king off on this flop beat 6.5% of the time. So now, whereas before a top pair top kicker was not strong enough to raise for value, now it most certainly is. That's a very important thing to know. Another important thing to know, which I'm not going to spend much time showing you the actual math for, is we can already see if we're raising 9 combos of ace king off on this board. Let's just imagine we raised all of our ace king off combos for value. Then if we were to raise king queen 2, even if we thought it was strong enough to raise, then all of a sudden if we're raising hands like queen king, ace king, sets, and flush draws, we're raising so much of our range that we're going to have to either end up having a very unbalanced raising range that's too weighted towards value, or we're going to have to raise pretty much our entire range on the flop. So we can kind of already tell that's theoretically wrong. If we're raising our entire range on the flop, then our opponent would never c-bet bluff. So we already know, okay, we're not really going to need to even look into raising king-queen here, because if we do, then we're raising too many combos and our opponent would never have c-bet. And obviously, if he is c-betting and bad, then you can exploit him, but we're mostly focusing on theory right here. All right, so I'm going to take off the removal effect of the ace-king. We're going to go back to our cold call button versus middle position, and then we're going to go ahead and start adding in combos to value raise. So, all right, let's just assume we're going to raise all the ace-king here. I think that's very debatable for whether or not we should actually do that, but I'm just going to throw it in for right now, and we'll see how it looks at the end. So we got 9 combos of ace-king off. Then let's imagine we're going to also raise pocket 7s, which will give us another 3 combos. And since we're already starting to raise so many combos of made hands, if we add in even more, then we're going to have, like, for example, if we stick to the 1.5 or 2-to-1 rule, if we add in the combos of 10s as well, now we're getting at 10 value combos that we're raising. So if we wanted to balance that out with 2 bluffs for every value hand, now we're raising 30 combos of bluffs. So it looks like we're getting our range too weighted towards raising. So I'm going to say we should slow play with pocket 10s. In practice, would I slow play with pocket 10s against most people? Probably not. Would I raise both ace-king, pocket 10s, and pocket 7s? Would I raise that wide of a range in practice? I probably would, because they're all clearly strong enough to raise for value. My opponents might not think I flat with ace-king when I do, so I would exploit them by doing it. But once again, we're focusing on theory, so while I don't want you to take this theory and play poorly, we are going to assume we're playing against a, very close to theoretically optimal opponent, and we should be flatting with some, ace-king off in our range. But if we raise all of our ace-king and all of our sets and all of our really good flush draws, we're going to be raising so incredibly wide that it has no incentive to ever continuation bet bluff. So because of that, we can either conclude that we shouldn't be raising with all of our ace-king and all of our sets, or our opponent should be checking, pretty much his entire range to us on the flop. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and call with pocket 10s. So I'm actually going to go ahead and throw that in the calling range right now. 10s, 3. So we're still playing some very strong hands here. Okay, so now we need to design the bluff raising range. Now, in the previous hand, we used a 2-to-1 bluff raising to value raising range for each of our made hands. But here, our made hands are a little bit stronger. Ace-king off isn't nearly as strong as a set. If the turn comes a spade, or if the turn comes like a jack or a queen, we might not want to keep firing with ace-king if the turn's like a queen of spades or a jack of hearts or something like that. We might think, okay, our hand's no longer strong enough to keep betting. We want to check back and get to showdown. So because ace-king off isn't going to stay a hand that can keep value betting as often as a set, we're going to need to lower our bluff raising to value raising ratio to make up for the fact that ace-king off doesn't always get a double and triple barrel for value. So let's do this. Let's count our value made hands. We've got 9 of ace-king off, 3 for pocket 7s, and rather than adding 2 bluffs for every 1 value combo, let's just add 1.5. So 9 plus 3 is 12. 12 times 1.5 is 18. So we're going to have 18 bluffs for our value hands, and then we're going to do the same thing as we did in the hand before. 4 flush draws, we'll add 2 bluffs to make up for that. So that comes to 20 combos of bluffs. So we'll put in that 20 right here. Okay, so now we want to defend 74 combos total. I'm going to scroll this over. We want to defend 74 combos total, and we have 16 combos that we're raising for value, 20 combos that we're raising for bluffs. We only need to call with 38. So now we need to add in the 38 hands we're calling with, and then we'll add in the bluff raises at the end. So, pocket 10s, that already gives us 3. Let's see what else we've got. Let's do top pair. Once again, I switch to the absolute when I'm doing this a lot of the time. So we have top pair. We've already added the ace-king. So we have king-queen suited, king-jack suited. King-queen suited, king-jack suited, 3 and 3. All right, what else do we got? We got pocket queens. That's going to give us 6 more combos. Pocket jacks will give us another 6 combos. Queen jack suited will give us 3 combos. And then let's check out the flush draws. We raised 4 for value, so now we have 4 more. So flush draws 4. See if there's anything else we really want to call with. 9-8 suited gives us another 3 combos that we can call with. Maybe we'll want to end up bluff raising that instead, but we'll start with putting that in the calling range. Going to widen this out a little bit. And then, maybe ace 10 suited is another 3. Jack 10 suited is another 3, and then 10-9 suited is another 3. So I think this is going to be too many combos. So let's look and count total. So we have 3, 3, 3, 15, 21, 24, 28, 31, 34, 37, 40. I'm going to double check that real quick so I can see it all at once. 3, 3, 3, 6, that's 15, plus 6, 3, that's 9, plus 15, 24, 28, 31, plus another 9. So that's actually only 40, so that's almost right around perfect. Yeah, that looks really, really good then. All right, so now that we have the 40 combos, which is close enough to what we wanted for our calling range, we can add in the 20 combos we want in the bluff raise. So this board is going to be really, really easy to find enough bluff raises, because ace-queen is going to give us a gut shot. So let's say we do ace-queen. That's going to give us, if we take out the flush draws, that gives us 15. And then if we do, we can now choose some combination of ace-jack suited or, 7x or whatever, but let's just stick with ace-jack suited. That gives us 3 more. And then we'll say, is there any other gut shot that we could have? Doesn't really look like it, so we can just put in 7-8 suited, which will give us the last. We'll just put all 3, so we get a few too many, and that gives us 21. Alright, so now let's look at our overall range and see how it looks. Our value raising range, to me, looks very, very solid. It's got a lot of vulnerable hands that are clearly strong enough to raise now, like ace-king. It's got some monsters like sets, and it has some flush draws to balance out all those made hands. Our bluff raising range consists of hands that can pretty easily improve. And, even a hand like ace-queen could always flop a turn a queen or an ace, which might be good on the turn if we check it down. So I really like our bluff raising range a lot. Our calling range also looks incredibly strong here. First of all, we're slow playing some sets, which is obviously a great thing to do, since now we can have some very, very strong hands on any possible turn card. We have not a whole ton of top pairs, but between, pocket jacks or better, we're having about almost a little less than half of our hands are going to, beat middle pair. And by middle pair, I mean 10x or better. Then we also have some really good draws. We have 4 flush draws, and we have 6 open-ended straight draws. And then we have a decent amount of, we have 9 10x hands, which can, we can pretty much release comfortably on a lot of turn cards if our opponent double barrels. So the calling range, once again, also looks very, very good. So when you see how well you can balance your range on a flop like this, and I just want to take one quick moment to mention, I think this pre-flop flatting range that I use is actually a really, really good one. I think a lot of people just think in theory and in practice you should auto 3-bet ace-king off and pocket queens on the button. And I wouldn't be surprised if in theory you are supposed to 3-bet some of them, but I imagine both in theory and in practice you should be calling with over half of the queens and ace-king, if not all of them. So I do think this is a very standard and good button flatting range. I think, as I said, you can change a little bit, but it's overall a very good one. And as you can see, it's just not that hard to defend on a flop texture like this. Same with the flop texture before. These are both flop textures we can defend very, very easily. And while it is a little bit unfortunate that both these two flop textures look so similar, they pretty much are the best flop textures also that represent what you should do with your entire range. So if we had to just randomly generate 2 incredibly similar flops, these were 2 really good ones to get. So anyways, on especially this second King 10-7 flop with a flush draw, this hits our range so well, maybe our opponent shouldn't really be c-betting very much. I don't think he should be checking 100% of the time, so we should defend with a range like this when he does c-bet. But this hits our range so well, and we're in position on a board texture where being in position is incredibly valuable, since the turn changes which hands are the strongest on so many different turn cards, that really, in theory, it wouldn't surprise me at all if our opponent's supposed to check this flop like 75 or 80% of the time to us. You very much get in a habit when you're playing, especially since most players, aren't that good at, the small stakes. You very much get in the habit of just thinking, oh, the flop's King 10-7 and I'm out of position. I'm just going to auto c-bet, ace queen or ace jack. They're gut shots. I'm just going to auto c-bet this middle pair or top pair because, my opponent won't bluff raise enough. But as you can see, if you're playing against someone competent and good, you're going to be in a really tough spot if you're c-betting this board wide. So something to think about when you do notice, hey, you know what, it looks like I can defend against this board really, really easily. That's awesome. Also think, well, on the flip side, if it's super easy to defend against this, to defend on this board, if you're a good player, then maybe when you are playing against good players, you should start checking as the pre-flop raiser a lot more. So keep that in mind, and I think we're going to have time to do one more flop now. Since this is the last flop and the other two were so much alike, we're not going to do this one completely random. So if we get another flop very similar to this one, I'm just going to keep randomly generating them. Still pretty similar. We can do this one. It's not an incredibly interesting flop, but you don't get incredibly interesting flops all the time, so why not? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is just once again punch in what we got. 10 of clubs, 9 of diamonds, 9 of spades. Total combos on the flop. We're going to have more combos on this one, I would imagine, since there's less blockers. So we got 123. How much did we have before? Okay, so we've got one more combo in this one. 123 combos. Right? Yep, okay. Desired combos defended. 123 times 0.6 equals 74 again when we just round up. So now we need to figure out if we want to have a value raising range. All right, so let's pause for a second and think about this. So if we look here, we want to first of all think what hands do we have that are strong enough to raise. So if we look at a middle position opening range, we're going to see that he has an overpair or better around 18.5% of the time. And if we look at it real quick, we can tell that queens and jacks for the two overpairs, you know, we could tie with pocket queens and we can beat pocket jacks with our pocket queens. That doesn't make up a whole lot of combos for all the nines our opponent has. So we can pretty much already conclude we can't raise pocket queens and pocket jacks for value. If we go back to our hand combos, we can see that we have three of a kind or better with only a very few hand combos. So since it's so rare that we actually have three of a kind or better, the only hands I would really want to raise with here would be 9-8 suited, since that's kind of a vulnerable type of trips, and that's maybe it. So in this spot, we could raise just 9-8 suited and balance it out with bluffs. And even though that sounds very, very weird, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You don't want to have a raising range that's very, very unbalanced, but even if we're only raising two combos for value and balancing it out with like four combos of bluffs like we could do right here, that's still a balanced raising range. So that's one option we could take. I highly prefer not raising with the boats, because the boats pretty much aren't going to lose. It's very, very unlikely that they can draw out on us when we have 10-9 suited or pocket 10s. So because of that, I'd rather slow play them to make the rest of our calling range stronger and delay the raise to a later street. So in this specific case, as I said, you could have raised 9-8 suited with a few bluff combos if you want, but I would probably prefer to flat my entire range. So if we need to defend 74 combos, you know what, we might even want to defend a little bit more than this since we're never raising. So let's say, rather than do that, let's put a little parentheses and say, you know what, we want to actually defend a few combos extra since we're always calling. So let's say 76. So then I would make the value raising range 0 and the bluff raising range 0. Once again, nothing wrong with throwing 9-8 suited into the value raising and then adding in 4 combos of bluffs, but I would probably prefer to just have no raising range here and only call. All right, so then once you got that, you pretty much just want to call with your best 76 combos of hands. So let's look. Let's just start with top pair or better. So we have queens, jacks, 10s, 9s. All right, so let's look. We have 10-10, which is 3 combos, 10-9 suited, which is going to be 1 combo, 9-8 suited, which is going to be 2 combos, pocket 9s, which is going to be 1 combos. So once again, we just don't have a whole ton of very strong hands. And then let's just make sure we got all that right. Or kind of better. Yeah, 7 combos. You can see that in the upper left. All right, then we're going to call with all of our overpairs. So that's pocket jacks and pocket queens. And then once again, as I said, I like to put a little bracket to let me know how many I got so far when I'm adding up hands. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 12. We got 19 combos so far. We got quite a ways to go. What else do we want to add in? We can see right here we have, you know, a lot of combinations of gut shots or better. We have a decent amount of top pairs still left to go, so we'll add that in. We'll have ace 10 suited, jack 10 suited. That gives us 3 more each, so that gets us to 25. So you can see this is the exact opposite of the hands before us. Like we only are a third done, and we're already running out of like top pair and better type hands. We only have a third of our hands done, whereas before we just had so much more stronger hands in our range. All right, so let's see. We can start adding in a lot of like our gut shots and backdoor flush draws. So like now I would really start putting more emphasis on adding like a lot of big overcards, like and a lot of straight draws. So let's add the open-ended straight draws first. We have Queen Jack suited. That's 4. 8-7 suited. That's 4. If we want to add in, let's see what our gut shots look like. Yeah, I can go for those gut shots. Queen King suited. That's 4. King Jack suited. That's 4. If we wanted to get pickier later on, we could also. I don't think I'm going to add 7-6 suited. We might have to add it at the end. But if we wanted to be really picky, like these Queen Queen suited and King Jack suited, only 3 of those 4 are going to have the backdoor flush draw. So if it was really close for whether or not we could add these gut shots, we probably only want to add the ones that have the backdoor flush draws. But I think we could add them all in this case since we're going to have to try so hard to defend enough combos. Then we can start adding in the under pairs. So let's pocket 8s. That gets us to 6 more. Pocket 7s. That gets us 6 more. Now we can start adding in. We have Ace King off is 12 combos. I would probably like calling with those. An ace or a king's likely good on the turn. We still have the nut non-pair hand. And once again, when you're trying to figure out what to call, you can go look at your opponent's range. And our opponent only has a pair, half the time, less than half the time. So when we are calling with Ace King, if our opponent c-bets any 2 cards on this board, and some people do if they c-bet too wide, we're ahead most of the time and getting pretty good odds, and we can always outdraw them when we are behind with Ace King off. So back to that range, and then, when we're calling with other stuff, let's just say Ace Queen suited, I'll put a little 3 there. So that 3, once again, we're only calling with the backdoor flush draw. Ace Queen suited with the backdoor flush draw. Let's say Ace Jack suited with the backdoor flush draw. And, now that we've started adding in more combos, let's see how many we got right here. So I'm going to stretch it out. We got to this little point right here, which was 19. Then we're going to add 3, 3, 4. That's 10, 14, 18, 22, 28, 34, 46, 49, 52. So that'd be 52 plus 19 would get us to 71. I'm going to double check that and count that again. So once again, 3, 3, 4, that's 10, 14, 18, 22, 28, 34, 46, 49, 52. 52 plus 19 is 71. Cool. So we got 71 combos and we need to defend about 5 more. So once again, now we can start adding in the 7-6 suited that we didn't add in before that gut shot. We could add in pocket 6s if we wanted, or we could add in Ace Queen. When you are doing flops like this, I've already done probably over 100 of these on my own, so I'm pretty comfortable with it. But when you are doing flops like this, you're still going to run into spots all the time, especially when you first start. And even as you get better, there's just going to be spots like right here where it's like, I'm not very passionate about whether or not it's better to call with pocket 6s now, or is it better to call with 7-6 suited, or is it better to call with Ace Queen? Like, all those seem like reasonable hands to call with to me. Ace Queen has 2 good overcards that can improve. That might be kind of tainted, though, but Ace Queen also might just win at Showdown, so it can both improve and win at Showdown. Pocket 6s are more likely to win at Showdown, but it also is going to have a hard time improving with that. And then 7-6 suited, it's just a very, very weak, kind of tainted straight draw. But, it's still a very, still hitting an 8 with 7-6 suited is significantly better than, hitting a queen with Ace Queen. So those are all really close. I'm just going to go ahead and throw in the 5 Ace Queen off to get us to the 76 we originally wanted. But as I said, I'm not very passionate about whether or not you should add in combos of Ace Queen at the end or pocket 6s or 7-6 suited. Pick whichever one you think's best against that opponent or which one you think's best overall. Okay, so now that we're done with the range in the third hand, we want to take a moment to look at the range. And as we can see, we have some boats, some overpairs, some top pair type hands. But overall, we've got a really lot of weak hands in our range. And that's not too bad of a thing, because, if our opponent double and triple barrels, we're going to be able to fold more hands on each additional street. So, for example, if I make another video, maybe we'll continue in this one. We'll continue on these hands, and we'll go to the turn to the river. But, like right here, you can kind of already see, if our opponent double barrels the turn and we're allowed to fold another 40% of our range, we're probably going to be releasing most of the hands on the turn that aren't like an okay pair or a pretty good draw. We can release most of our like very weak air hands, like our Ace Jack or Ace Queen or our pocket 7s or something like that. We can release those on the turn. So it's not too bad that our range is very weak, because we're not going to get to showdown with most of these hands here. We're either going to check down with our medium strength hands, or if he checks to us on the turn, we'll bet our really good hands like our boats or our overpairs, and we'll bet our bluffs. So it's not too bad that we have this weak range, but it is important to notice, since our range is so much weaker on this flop, on the third flop, our opponent's probably going to c-bet a little bit more. Let's look at what his range looks like. So when we open when we flat against this middle position open in this board, we have, top pair or better. I'm sorry, it should be this one. We have top pair or better 20.3% of the time. He has top pair or better 29.1% of the time. That's a pretty big jump. Likewise, he has an overpair or better 18.4%. We have an overpair or better 15.4%. Lastly, we have trips or better 5.7%. He has trips or better 7.6%. So we can see this board texture right here, it hits our opponent's range harder than it hits ours. We expect him to continuation bet more because he has a stronger range. Likewise, on these two board textures, it probably hit our range stronger than it hit his, and we had the advantage of being in position, so we would expect him to check more than he bets. I mean, that's a really basic thing, but it's something that's really important to think about, because especially as you're climbing up the stakes, if you're playing micro stakes or small stakes, depending on what sites or what times you're playing at, you can really get away with just c-betting way too often and not really looking at board texture, just betting with all your gut shots when you're the pre-flop raiser and always checking when you're the cold caller and you're out of position. But that gets pretty bad when you start playing against good players, and you really got to think about the board texture. So now we're at the end of the video. First off, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was probably one of my favorite videos to make, so hopefully you guys enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. Please give me feedback and post your questions in the forums. If you think I did something incorrectly with one of the ranges, or if you're confused why I did something with one of the ranges, be sure to let me know. Or if you just have feedback for how you think I can make videos like this better in the future, be sure to drop by and give me your 2 cents. I know we didn't get to go past the flop, but there's too much theory to cover to discuss more than a few different textures in a few spots in a single video. I don't really like going over Flopzilla stuff until we have a pretty good understanding of what we're looking for and trying to do in theory. So while we might in future videos get to go over turn and river play, it's really hard to go past the flop, especially since we have to know what our turn and river range look like before we can go over the turn and river play with Flopzilla. So hopefully in the future we'll get a chance to go over that. And thanks for watching, and good luck at the tables, everyone. All right, take care, guys. Bye.